It's much more important to take a decision fast and fail. Be truthful to yourself, who you are. The things that I love most about AEC, it operates a bit like in God mode. It essentially builds the planet. There's never been a time where so much energy, innovation, and dedication is being poured into the foundations of how AEC gets done. And I feel that now we're finally catching up. And this is for me really exciting. Hello everybody, my name is Dimitrie. I describe myself as a recovering architect. Now I am founder CEO at Speckle, Speckle being the data platform for AEC. I like coding a lot, I like building companies a lot, and I like the intersection of the digital and the built world. So I grew up in Bucharest. I do consider myself a kind of European Union byproduct because I did manage to, so like in Bucharest, I studied architecture for around about 4 years, but then I moved over to the Netherlands in Rotterdam, doing my master's there in TU Delft. I was coding a lot. I was doing a lot of workshops throughout Europe around computational design and architecture and engineering. And all that was kind of powered by being able to move around. And jobs afterwards, I ended up actually working in Stuttgart as a wissenschaftlicher Mitarbeiter, if I said that correctly. At the Kunstakademie, teaching computational design there. Then I ended up in Brussels, working as an architect. And then finally, I ended up here in London around about 2015. And I was there at UCL. Fun fact, it's also, I think, 6 months after I arrived, the Brexit referendum happened, which was a very encouraging move. But maybe we keep politics out of this conversation, right? So I studied architecture. It's a very funny story. So in high school, I was coding a lot, like doing 8 hours of C++ a week, which we did wonders for my social life, as you can imagine. And I wanted to actually do interactive projections for theater plays. So I wanted to study new media. But then the clash with the parents sounded like, this is Romania, there's not money in that, like this is not a proper job. Why don't you study architecture, which is like a right technical mix between, let's say, programming, between like being an analytical thinker and a creative thinker. So that's how I ended up studying architecture. But I never stopped coding in that process, actually. Like I was always driven to apply programming to various tasks, and I've kind of sharpened over the time like what you apply, let's say, coding skills at or like digital tools at, and maybe that's where kind of like my whole career started being defined. Probably my favorite city now that I also have a kid and all that stuff, so history looks much better, the past looks much better, was Rotterdam. Just because of the student life there and the opportunities and kind of the vibrancy of the university there. I also really enjoyed Brussels because actually it was the right mix of Dutch and French culture. So you got really good food. Maybe too many European Union bureaucrats around there, but we were not hanging out with them. So London, though, has a special place in my heart. It's been the city that I've been longest in now, so like coming up to a decade or a bit more than a decade now, which makes me feel old when I say that. And I mean, London's great. It can be intense, but it can also be relaxing. So it offers opportunities, but you choose when and how to like take them. While I was studying, I was always trying to blend essentially the analytical parts of building things, buildings, infrastructure, roads, tunnels, with the creative side of the story, but also like with the data side of the story. When I graduated, it was a bit of a shitty moment. Like it was the 2008 boom and bust cycle, so there were actually no jobs to be had. That's why I ended up actually, luckily, studying. I perceived it at the time as a kind of a misfortune, like at a very classic architectural studio in Brussels. It was a very small shop, like 10 to 15 people. We were growing to 20 when the times were better. And there I was trying to apply like all these computational design techniques and so on to square buildings and very, I would say, classic projects. It was a period in which I learned that actually what's most important is not how things actually look, or like, getting a very fancy Zaha Hadid-like facade or like a double curved glass panel in, but it's a lot about interacting with various stakeholders. These stakeholders look at a building through various lenses. And as architects, we were not very well geared towards creating these shared understandings between someone that does economics or someone that does essentially structural design even. And the process was full of friction at the end of the day. And my biggest aha moment was when we were working on a master plan for Brussels Nord, for the north part of Brussels, next to their train station there. And there was an economist involved that was doing essentially an economic model of how that master plan would work. That was a lot of data. That data was being then translated into some, let's say, architectural or urban affordances. And nothing in my training as an architect prepared me for that moment. But that's when I realized that actually when we design master plans or buildings, that data is already kind of part of that design. There's a lot of heuristics that go into thinking about these things as an architect or urban designer. But it was just very difficult to surface it up back in the language of, say, an economist, or in the language of the mayor, or in the language of someone who's running a different feasibility study, or different stakeholders, as I was mentioning before. So that was the biggest aha moment. I realized it's a very kind of diverse environment, and we're not empowered to speak to all of the stakeholders in there. And as architects, that's kind of like faulting us a lot. That's when the first ideas around Speckle came into play, because I realized, hey, it's not about how a building looks like. It's actually much more about like how that building translates into things that other stakeholders understand. And I do believe that there's kind of all the essential qualities and quantities in a floor plan, in a building, in a road. They can be surfaced up to different stakeholders so that they can actually make sense of them into their own calculations and into their own domains. And on the basis of that, I actually did this like very weird moonshot application for a Marie Curie fellowship at UCL in London, which I received after a couple of like interviews there. And that's how I transitioned into London, UCL, where I actually had the space to actually like test these ideas out and figure out if there's any worth to them. In London at UCL, I had the space to actually do the thinking around the problems that I was describing earlier, like how to take buildings, how to take the data that's happening while we design things and surface it up. Initially, there was no idea around Speckle. The name Speckle didn't exist in my head, or the concept behind it. But as you do in every research, there's a large body of literature review that you need to go through. And that was a very boring phase of the whole process. So I started coding something up. And the OG Speckle was like a very simple tool for a computational design software called Grasshopper that was just instantly sharing your 3D model straight up in seconds. That was all it was doing. I started it as a side project and as a way to get my head out of all the papers that I was reading and the literature that I was reviewing. And I put it out there to see what the reaction is. It got some reactions, but also some of the industry partners that I had as part of this Marie Curie project like started seeing things in it. And essentially like I started refining it, and I'm refining it more. And Speckle went through many iterations. It's a bit like there's this ship, like all the parts have changed 100 times already. It's the same thing. The name is the same. People ask me around the origins of the name, like why Speckle, where it's coming from. Whenever I tell the story, it doesn't give them any kind of satisfaction. So maybe I skipped that part really. When I first put Speckle out, I just launched it into the internet. There is an already existing vibrant community of computational designers and people who code in AEC. And I just seeded it into that group into that side of the internet. It started spreading organically. It was not open source, though then I did at one point share the repos that were behind that original version of Speckle. That's how it took off. As things progressed, people from McNeil, who are the makers of Rhino, an authoring tool that architects and engineers use a lot, they started chipping in, and it was with their help, specifically Luis Fraguada, that we, at that time, and when I say we already kind of grew into a little kind of community of Specklers at that point. People excited around the project or either using it in day-to-day workflows. We created a Slack group. That was the hot topic at the time. That's how you got together. We created a Slack where we would hang out. Then obviously nobody wanted to pay for that Slack group, so we started hitting Slack's like 10,000 message limit. So Luis ended up setting up a discourse forum where like none of that would actually, the limits would not apply, and then essentially the community could gather meaningfully. And kind of the advantages behind essentially like having a purely, let's say, chat-based gathering versus a forum-based gathering started actually accumulating, because in a forum people ask questions: how do I do this? Can I try that? How did you solve that? In a WhatsApp group, things disappear. In a Slack channel, again, things disappear. But in the forum, they stay there, they're searchable, and it was a good place for the community to start kind of gathering and coagulating. That's kind of how the first seeds of Speckle's community started, blossoming into fruits, flowers, whatever metaphor you want to use there. When the Speckle community started growing, I was slightly surprised, but also not that surprised, for various reasons. At UCL, within the Marie Curie research project that was happening at the time where I was based, there were a large group of industry partners like Foster and Partners, Bureau Happold, and a bunch of other like kind of large AE companies, as well as like service providers like McNeil, who are the makers of Rhino. Now, they helped seed that initial community through their enthusiasm and their work. This is where I met my co-founder later down the line, Matteo. This is where also Luis started showing up, Luis Fraguada from McNeil. And it was a group of people that I think coagulated around pretty much a novel at the time approach in the industry, or like kind of rare. The fact that Speckle was fully open source. I made Speckle fully open source. I took that decision while in UCL, in short, to shortcut a bunch of like political crap that was accumulating around who owns Speckle, IP, and so on and so forth. But also because I wanted to set an example that, hey, if we share things, there's a lot of positive externalities that can help this grow bigger than an individual can grow it. The AEC industry, for context there, is rather boxed in by vendors that are locking people into proprietary software and into walled gardens, similarly into opaque file formats that are very difficult to parse beyond those authoring tools that produce them. So it's a very boxed in place. Speckle, by being open source, transparent, was diametrically opposed to that. And I think that resonated with a lot of people. It also helped essentially some architecture companies and so on kind of like, hey, we can share more. Like, our secret sauce is actually the designs that we produce and how we engage with the clients and the experience around that, rather than actually like what kind of magic little scripts we have in-house for generating facades or doing quantity takeoffs. And that was really wonderful to see, and it was an amazing time at that point. Fun fact here, like when we decided to take Speckle further, the initial ideas were around establishing an open source foundation and kind of having that shepherd the growth of Speckle, the project itself. At one point, like all good things, the time at UCL had to stop. The research project was running for 3 years, and after 3 years it ran out of money. So I was on the market for a job. Luckily there, Arup was already using Speckle for a bit. And they offered me a very generous position to like go in there and like keep on developing Speckle as an open source project. And those were, again, 2 great years of my life, and Arup supported the project really well by doing that, and me as well. After a while, the limitations of developing an open source project inside the company, while that open source project is also used by their competitors, started to show up. And that's why the company was born. Pretty much so. History-wise, there was 3 years of, let's say, intellectual incubation and practical incubation in UCL, 2 years more of actually like putting that project through its paces at Arup. And then we decided like, hey, you know, we can go much faster and grow this thing quite well if we go independent, because there was already like a good amount of people using it. There was a great community around it. And we said, okay, what's the fastest way that we can grow this project and take over all data inside AEC? And we decided to establish a company around the open source project that would be focusing on developing and then later down the line commercializing this open source project. That's where the journey of Speckle, in air quotes, the company started, with basically like our pre-seed raise from Foundamental. For those of you who don't know what Speckle is a open source data platform for AEC. That's a very abstract value proposition. So we've wrapped it up into several like kind of productified experiences for people. They center around interoperability, being able to exchange data faster in between authoring tools, basically saving hours in an individual's time on a weekly basis, as well as things like business intelligence and collaboration and actually analytical access to that data. So going all the way from applications of simply like doing design reviews in a browser and issue tracking and tracking design faults, all the way to basically vacuuming up data from the Speckle host API and being able to train AI and LLMs on top of your company's historical data. All this kind of geared towards like helping companies deliver a better project next time they're doing it again. It's not about like helping design in the now, it's also about helping design in the future and keeping track of historical learnings and making those available both towards human beings as well as for essentially like our newfound partners, AI and agents. Open source means a lot of things to many people, and its understanding also varies by industry to industry, depending on their digital maturity. Of course, inside AEC, open source was initially perceived as free beer, whereas actually the closer or the better definition of that is that open source means the free recipe for the beer itself. You still have to brew the beer yourself and front the costs for doing that and setting up your brewery, but you have the recipe for doing that. Together with a couple of like friends and like community members, we continuously struggled in pushing this message across. And to this day, there are still, let's say, pockets of the AEC internet that still think Speckle is free or should be free. And they get confused when they see that we actually have a pricing page. But it varies differently now. So from how things were like 4 years ago, it's a world of change in between how AEC was perceiving open source software, like, is it communist software? Like, why is it free? We don't understand these things, to actually now understanding that open source is essentially core parts of their infrastructure already, and that it has like much more potential for them to adopt strategically rather than existing closed source solutions. This understanding evolved over time. I like to believe we helped in pushing that understanding across, but it's also obviously the effort of many people. So that's where essentially open source always played a vital role in Speckle's perspective. Like the how specifically differs. There were people coming to Speckle because it's free beer. But then when they realized it's actually like a free beer recipe, they still hanged around, and then they understood also like what open source means for Speckle itself, and what it means for us is that we're basically wearing our heart on our sleeve to a certain extent. And what that means is that as a customer, you can keep us always accountable, because if you're pissed at the Speckle, you can essentially take your toys, self-host Speckle, and not deliver any dollar towards the company itself. What this creates is a very good trust-based relationship between us and the wider community, but as well our customers. We understand that we need to be honest to each other, and that we need to extract value in a meaningful way, and we need to create that value in the first place. I get asked a lot what comes first, open source or the community that grows around it. I think there's no really starting point here. You can start an open source project and then the community will gather around it. Or you can actually start a community, and then that community, if it's motivated enough, they will start an open source project, or maybe even more. So it goes both ways. With Speckle, I think it was more of the former, where the open source project started first. Of course, globally, we were fitting in a more global open source community. But when it comes to AEC and the construction industry, we started an open source project, and then a community assembled around it. That's a very fun dynamic to see happening, and I wholeheartedly recommend to anybody trying it out. You've got nothing to lose. When you start an open source project and the community grows around it, to a certain extent, that community becomes a bit like the village that helps you raise a kid. Now, just like any village, that can be an annoying village or can be a helpful village, or there will always be that annoying neighbor now and then. It comes with all the joys of a family, but also all the kind of like responsibilities of a family. That's something that needs to be wielded carefully to a certain extent, and articulated and shaped in a nice way. It goes back to what we were discussing earlier around trust, and I think communication and transparency are key to having this village co-found a company together with you, or actually help grow that company into a serious adult. Obviously, not all of Speckle is open source. Our model is essentially an open core around which we have built a proprietary crust of features. Now, historically speaking, I think maybe 75% of our time so far we have invested into the open source core of Speckle. Around about 1 year and a half ago, we started developing proprietary components of the Speckle platform that we are actively monetizing and leveraging towards the success of our enterprise clients. Reactions to this were mixed, but also we've set expectations right from the beginning. So from the start, we were transparent with our community, saying that, hey, at one point this will happen. We were adamant in pushing the message that open source is not free beer. It's free beer as a recipe rather than as a product. And when we started doing these moves and started commercializing Speckle more intensively or with more purpose, everybody's reaction was a bit of, duh, like, of course you guys need to do this. You're a company. We totally understand. This is great stuff. Let's talk how I can like get access to these features. Obviously, there were also like funny reactions where like, oh, angry people, why is that not open source? Why is that closed source, and so on. And there's a very funny saying, or like there's a funny phenomenon that happens when a primarily closed source company makes something open source, like Google, like Microsoft or whatever. The crowd goes wild. It's like, oh my God, X made Y open source, amazing. But when a primarily open source company makes something closed source, the reaction is like, oh, these guys are evil. So we had a bit of that. The key to navigating these waters is being transparent with our community. We set the expectations straight almost from the start. We were also clear because this model became more articulated as we progressed in the history of the company. But we essentially took our community and our advocates along with us on that journey of understanding. So that's what I would recommend that everybody does. Honesty and trust does pay off. Speckle is growing fast now. We're signing up enterprise clients a lot, with a speed and a pace that we were not fully expecting. And this means also we had to change, and we are changing like how we are responding to community needs. There's a funny story, or like a kind of funny saying, where like all open source projects, like take Blender for example. I don't know if you know Blender. It's a very complex piece of 3D modeling software, mostly used in the games industry. It has so many buttons that you cannot begin learning them. Like you need a whole month to start understanding Blender's UI. And there's a fun saying that pretty much all open source projects end up being a bit like Blender, where they like explode in complexity because everybody wants a new button, a new thing doing something else, and so on. At Speckle, we suffered a bit from that point, but actually it prepared us for what's happening now. So the community actually having all these varied requests coming in, can Speckle do this? We want to do that. Can you expose that API, etc., 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 helped us build a robust platform that we can actually articulate and shape in very targeted ways for our enterprise customers. So all bad towards good at the end of the day. Now, how we see this as a metaphor is that we've built a set of Lego blocks. Those Lego blocks we have articulated into a bunch of Lego sets, which you can pick up off the shelf. But AEC in general is very project specific, is very company specific. There's a lot of specificity. When you build an airport or when you build like a capital project, that becomes its own micro universe of standards, needs, workflows, etc., which one single product usually struggles to serve. And that's where essentially like us balancing the community needs, being able to make a modular platform really helps, because now we can actually shape that towards a commercial agenda. It's not something necessarily easy to achieve. It's something that we're iterating a lot continuously, but this is where the two converged in a kind of surprising way, ultimately, rather than a classic way. As a founder and as a person, I don't believe a lot in positive advice. I believe a lot in negative advice. So I have a lot of stories of like what not to do. Primarily in this is it's actually codified into a fake internet law. It's mostly a meme. Any surface area of an API that you expose, whether it's documented or not documented, is a feature and it's going to be used by someone. And if you take it away, you're going to annoy someone. This happened to us a lot and still happens to us a lot as we're trying to balance the needs of like continuously modernizing Speckle, the platform, and shaping it further. We do need to like kind of let go of certain things. And this is quite difficult sometimes to manage from a technical perspective. So within this, there were like plenty of like tactical decisions that were bad. All of this is very easy to overcome, because I think another big lesson for me is that it's very easy to iterate on product. It's very easy to iterate on platform. The most difficult thing to iterate on, and where I feel like most companies would struggle, including us sometimes, is like when you need to iterate on business model. And this is something that we have launched in head first, and we are maybe moving fast here, but this is essentially like where the most value is to be gained from iteration rather than from purely product iteration itself. You don't want to trap yourself in local maxima. You want to make sure you are providing the right kind of value to your customers and that you're charging ultimately in the right way for it. And that's stuff that I think I'm really proud that Speckle as a company, for better or for worse, with the internal grumbles, we excel at doing. Trust is really important for us at Speckle. It's trust towards our community, trust towards our clients, and the trust that we receive back. Obviously, we do not build that trust alone, and we do not spread that goodwill alone. Like, our community is a key engine there. And so Speckle being open source and having this bottom-up driven motion really helped infiltrate AEC enterprises, both large and small, which a headlong attack would have made it a completely different game, and it would have been much more difficult. It would have also created the wrong incentives in how we develop the platform and in how we develop the product. Speckle's aim was always to be valid both for the individual architect working in a team, the individual structure engineer, but as well deliver value to a organization at scale. Being open source and having this diverse community helped us a lot keep all these incentives aligned in the story of Speckle's development as a data platform. And to this day, there's various like wild anecdotes and stories, like how did Speckle get adopted into Jacobs, for example. At one point, there was a random person on the forum asking us how do I self-host my server? We helped them out, and 6 months later, it turns out that that person was the CDO of Jacobs. We had no idea at the time. It was random username plus number with a random Gmail address. But this goes to say like kind of how the motion around having a strong community, being open source, actually can be leveraged into commercial success later down the line. And I like to believe that these two, they're not opposed to each other. There are many things that I would do differently if I were to start Speckle over again. Company, project, code base wise, cultural wise, team building wise, there's an endless list of negative lessons learned that I don't want to bore the audience with. I think a lot of it is down to actually having the courage to do something that may or may not work, and actually be naively thinking and expecting a positive outcome. This might actually work, and just like taking that dive is really important. As you kind of progress from essentially like pre-seed to seed and Series A, and beyond, I think taking these essentially cold plunges or leaps of faith, they become more calculated, but essentially the temperature of the water doesn't change much in which you jump. So that training, I think, is really important, especially for me, that I don't come from an entrepreneurial family. I don't really have the background or the consultancy behind me to back any of these kind of moves at. This is also Europe. It's like, in some cases, diametrically opposed to the Silicon Valley or other, let's say, beautiful places. I think London is a nice in-between, but it also suffers from, the old bones of the continent. They're a bit creaky and so on. This also goes back to something else. It's important to be truthful to yourself, who you are as a person, and then to others around you, be explicit around that, whether it's like your work ethics, whether it's your essentially like endurance, what you expect or what you don't expect from yourself and from others. All these things need to be clarified from the start, especially as you start a company, be it open source or not. I think open source helped us conceptualize and verbalize kind of some of our intentions and our aspirations around transforming the AEC industry in a way that we wouldn't have been able to back up were we not open source. But the same movement and intentionality should apply on you as a founder or as a person or as a startup employee. It's always, the world is always combined, right? That you will always have essentially people who are happy just to execute stuff, and people who are also happy to actually break the mold, go beyond that, take ownership and define where you go. And it's really important for you to understand, I think, which is maybe a missed opportunity that we had in the past, like to understand like what kind of company am I? Am I breaking new ground? Do I need to innovate and then kind of, or not? Or do I need to just execute because it's a known problem that just needs to be solved better? And that kind of also defines what expectations you have from your early employees and the hiring that you do. One very simple mistake that I can talk to We always struggled in the past hiring. This was like kind of pre-seed, seed times. Who is Speckle? What is AEC? Like, you don't attract talent. It was difficult for us to attract talent. We were very nice people. We were very actually, quirky, friendly, culturally alert and in tune with the world. But what happened was that when we were doing interviews, we were overselling the company into actually it's a much better place. It's like, well, work-life balance is amazing. It was not amazing. It was like people were working days, nights, weekends, maybe because they wanted it to, or maybe because they were passionate. Maybe there was no need for that, but that passion was in us. But we were selling ourselves as this like kind of beautiful, mature startup, which we were not. And that attracted essentially the wrong kind of people, which in hindsight, it was not necessarily all their fault that they at the end they didn't fit in, but it was kind of our fault in trying to posture ourselves or position ourselves in a way that we were not. And now, for example, like there's a huge job in every interview process, there's a moment where we do a lot of anti-selling, depending on the position, of course, but we just like say, Speckle actually sucks a lot from the following points of view. And then people actually self-select whether they want to continue or not, or they understand, and like the real good fits actually like say, oh, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Where can I start? So being truthful to yourself as a company and as an individual, I think is really important. And then also communicating that well is also key in having a good marathon. This is not a sprint. This is like a series of sprints that keep on happening every year, every quarter. There's a new challenge, and you cannot last through them if you're not in tune with who you are as a company and as an individual. The future is really exciting for the AEC industry and for the wider built environment. I think it's a really important moment. It's always like infrastructure grows and needs to grow much more. People need houses to live in, cities are growing. So it's a very vibrant place to operate in as a company. And it's exciting because actually like there's more and more of this understanding that actually all the creativity and effort that goes into designing this future of the planet itself, because this is what essentially construction does, is backed up by data, and the importance of that data coming in real time, catching decisions and aligning stakeholders. People are understanding that they can get much more out and be happier in general, not by suing each other, which is a favorite pastime in AEC, but by actually collaborating and reaching a shared understanding, and us providing them the data to do so and the tools, makes me really excited about the future, and how it's being shaped and how we articulate it is also what gets me going. Like some of the biggest kicks in my life, the biggest highs, so to say, came from actually seeing something that I designed and that I helped design to actually get built and cast a shadow on the earth. Speckle kind of provides a much more scalable way of me getting that exact same high. Another thing that gets me excited about AEC and the digital world is kind of the wealth of startups that are attacking the authoring layer now. Tools like Giraffe, Snapthrough, Arcol, and others, TestFit, shout out to my best friend Clifton. They're doing God's work in here because authoring is really hard and it's very difficult. It's like a huge problem to tackle. And frankly, at Speckle, we chickened out of it. We said, no, our main goal is capturing the data layer, and we'll leave authoring to Revit and all the others. But seeing all this new generation of tools emerging and going to market is really exciting because, again, my former architect self would really enjoy using them and, cracking them up. So there's never been a time where so much energy, innovation, and dedication is being poured into the foundations of how AEC gets done. To a certain extent, the digital revolution passed construction and associated industries by, and I feel that now we're finally catching up. And this is for me really exciting because deep down, I'm still an architect that actually wants to design better buildings. The things that I love most about AEC as a whole, as an industry, it's probably that the fact that kind of as a group of individuals and as a group of companies, it operates a bit like in God mode. It essentially builds the planet. So that's something that provides a baseline level of excitement that cannot purely go away at all. Otherwise, on a more tactical point, like what excites me about AEC is the fact that when you build something, it doesn't stay virtual. Maybe I need to like counter that with some things that do not give me satisfaction. So like I was an early, like, I don't know, back in the days, I was mining Bitcoins, right? When you could actually still do it on a shitty computer at home. I was doing that mostly out of digital curiosity and exploration fun. I stopped doing that because of all the kind of like everything that was happening there stayed as a virtual element. So it was kind of a feedback loop that stayed and amplified itself in a digital fashion purely, and just that. And it's the same around maybe economics. I know money moves mountains, but at the same time, money is just a number. I am really tied to that tangible part of the world where you can actually do something, and then, you know, if you hit your head against it, you're gonna bleed. If you do that, you can't really hit your head against an algorithm or of a purely kind of, let's say, digital concept. That's stuff that turns me on less. So that's kind of, I believe, like kind of the key differentiator between AEC and everything else, like why I would probably still end up working in AEC and not, for example, I don't know, fintech, is because of that tangibility of concrete. AI triggers a lot of like happy and sad feelings in me when I think about it. Sad because a lot of the generative AI potential that's right now used in AEC has been stuck into the 2D world of purely visualization. And I think I've suffered through a few too many conference presentations where people talk about AI, but the only thing you get out of is look at this new comfy UI workflow that I got going for producing renders, which is a great thing, but I also feel like it's kind of lacking that foundational research potential that we can have. Together with our customers, we're engaging in this conversation. So when you go beyond the superficialities of, let's say, visualization, and you try and dive deeper into like how AI can surface your data up, AI is still a bit of a solution in search of a problem. And it's also very tricky. Like there's a lot of caution that is coming from the customers, and buildings need to stand up and not kill people. I think that's kind of mantra number one. And they need to be designed well to do so. And using AI systems here that are right 95% of the time is not feasible, because that 5% of the time that they're not right is still gonna, like, you know, skyrocket your insurance. So this is where there's a little bit of an impedance mismatch between like how AI models currently operate and how they can be applied within AEC. But I cannot deny that AI is bringing a lot of value in when it comes to like parsing through a lot of RFIs, scanning a lot of PDF documents. That's where it really kind of amplifies the day-to-day, and I think that's a wonderful, essentially, place where AI can be applied. Nevertheless, the sadness comes from that it's not domain-specific necessarily. It has the context of AEC, but it does not really like know the heart and soul of AEC yet, which it seems it has permeated really well in other places in that manner. I think as AEC itself and as construction kind of digitizes itself more, then it can open up itself more towards these models and actually like helping these models help us later down the line. At Speckle, with many of our customers, we're embarking on this journey of like, what can I do with my data? How can I make this data available for AI? And this is where we're helping them like take all their historical projects and models, put them into Speckle, and then actually with Speckle as a data platform, stream them down and like actually start doing training of specific LLMs on top of their own data. That's the model that we're helping the industry implement, because we believe like a core asset of each of these companies operating in this space is their designs, is their data itself. and we don't believe in actually like us centralizing those learnings and us training our own AI models on top of everybody's data. That's a model that we believe does not really work well for AEC because of all the kind of way things are set up right now. There's a big component of imposter syndrome in pretty much my day-to-day life continuously. My journey as basically as a programmer in high school, as an architect, and as a like kind of this mixed breed of like architect that does coding for the domain. Then starting a company, now there's like 27 Specklers working full time. It's amazing. At the same time, it also brings a lot of like, what the fuck moments, you know, when you're like, oh my God, what am I doing here? There's a lot of that happening, but at the same time, it's extremely interesting. So Speckle never stood still as a company, like, or as a project. Like there was always something new, a new challenge to crack, a new challenge to solve, a new failure to de-risk or like kind of recover from. And that's what mostly keeps me going. Growing into the role of a CEO is a journey that I'm still on. I'd like to believe that I'm surrounded by great people and great partners. This is coming from all the way from investors to employees to the community. And it's always about, at least when it comes from my perspective, it's always about the curiosity in the day-to-day life and making sure that I define what I like and that I am able to satisfy that hunger and that for the curious things that I can solve. What can I learn today? How can I do that better? What's the most important thing that I can apply now? And Speckle, there was no real recipe we could apply. So it was not essentially open source in a kind of like weird, quote unquote, niche 12 trillion industry that had no idea about open source at the time and was very low on the digitalization front. There were no playbooks you could like whap out and apply. Everything needed to be adapted. All recipes that you would read would need to be adapted. The speed of adoption is different in AEC, but also the stickiness is wildly different in AEC. These are variables that you have to juggle on a day-to-day basis when you take decisions. And obviously, it's not easy. Obviously, sometimes you freak out, like, did I take the right decision? Main lesson for me so far is that it's much more important to take a decision fast and fail rather than essentially agonize in a circular discussion. This is coming from also Speckle as an open source project. It's a very democratic place. Then the company took a lot of that on board where we were very consensus based. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we move slow, but that doesn't necessarily mean we move fast. And round about 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago, I needed to make this cultural shift inside the company where, okay, research is nice, being nice to each other, it's also nice. Taking decisions together is nice, but at one point, velocity matters much more rather than consensus. And that's still a challenge that we're going through, culturally speaking, when it comes to Speckle. There's other complexity items there, like us being a remote first company. We started off in COVID, so there was literally no choice in us being remote or not. There were a lot of mistakes that we made there. And again, there were no recipes that you could really apply when it comes to us. And if there were, maybe like a second-time founder would not do them. So I'm a completely different person now from where I was 5 years ago, 4 years ago. Would I do this again? I think the answer is yes. How would I do it? Like, I think I would start even earlier. I'd get into it even faster. So with all the pain, blood, sweat, and tears, it's a resounding yes. I would not essentially trade any of the decisions that I've made in the past for a different direction. It all kind of assembles itself as a very beautiful puzzle, and none of, let's say, the pain and the drawbacks and the down moments like actually take away from the existential joy that you get from actually creating a company, building an open source project, and actually building stuff that people use. That's where I stand. Possibly, maybe my partner would disagree in this statement, but I don't think so. As a founder, there's many things that piss you off on a day-to-day basis. Especially me, I'm like a very classic Eastern European, stingy, skeptical motherfucker. whenever even the most amazing thing can happen today, I will always think, okay, this could have been better in this way and this way and that way. That's my default position. I've learned to exist with that. It's also, I've learned to kind of like channel some of that energy in a more nuanced way with the people that I'm working with. Most of it is directed internally. When those happen, like things that calm me down are actually very mechanical things. Like I love to go back in product. I love to code. So then I will just like carve out 1 hour of my time to shut down my brain and just like write some code that maybe goes nowhere, but it's like therapy for me. Other people do drugs, other people do sports. Since I have a kid, I didn't have any more time for sports. I could say sometimes actually playing with a toddler is a good therapy session, though that's always a conflicting part of my current lifestyle. It's like balancing family and company. I feel that I am overbalancing towards the company, but then again, this is something that probably I took over from my parents, who all my early memories of them, they were like just sitting in front of their computers working. So I do not understand the world in any different way now than then. But basically things that shut down your brain, that's actually something that will calm you down. If gym shut down your brain, go for it. Gym for me, or like running or any kind of exercise. If it's mechanical, it's gonna like actually amplify the echo chamber of like, I hate this. Badminton, for example, which is a sport that I played a long time when I was young, like actually that does shut down my brain because it's like the endless chase for the shuttle. That's all you think about. You're like a cat focused on the laser dot. But it's essential to kind of understand as a founder for you, like what gets you back into that happy place and what kind of like makes you calm again. Sometimes I enjoy being not calm. I actually enjoy being a bit bellicose. I actually enjoy, being a little bit going rogue and challenging people left and right. I think that's helpful. I'm sure some of the people working at Speckle would say that that's something that I could temper down a bit more. But at the same time, like I'm happy if I get the same behavior back.